My aunt lived in my house, rent-free for 6 years, then told me it's not really your house anymore and demanded I sign it over. I didn't argue. I uncovered what she'd been doing behind my back and gave her 30 days to get out. I'm 34, and until about 3 weeks ago, I genuinely believed the most stressful thing in my life was figuring out whether my truck needed new brake pads or if I was just being paranoid. Turns out brake pads are the least of my problem when your own flesh and blood decides your house belongs to them because they've been sleeping in it long enough. Buckle up because this one's a ride. Let me give you the backstory so none of this feels like it came out of nowhere. I grew up in a small town outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. My mom passed when I was 11. Ovarian cancer, fast, brutal, and the kind of loss that rearranges the furniture in your chest permanently. After she died, my dad did his best, but his best looked a lot like working 70-hour weeks at a trucking company and leaving me with my Aunt Colleen, his younger sister, for most of my teenage years. Now, Colleen wasn't a bad person back then. She was 26 when my mom died, freshly divorced, no kids yet, and she stepped up in a way that mattered. She made sure I ate dinner, helped me with homework when she could drove me to baseball practice. I won't pretend she was a saint. She borrowed money from my dad, constantly had a revolving door of boyfriends who each lasted about as long as a bag of chips at a Super Bowl party, and she had this habit of making every situation about herself. But she was there, and when you're 11 and your mom is gone, there counts for a lot. Fast forward to my mid-20s. I'd been working in commercial HVAC since I was 19. Started as a helper, got my journeyman card, then my master license by 24. I was pulling in solid money, banking, most of it living lean. By the time I was 27, I'd saved enough for a down payment on a small 3-bedroom ranch house on about half an acre just outside of Maryville. Purchase price was $187,000. I put down $42,000, financed the rest on a 15-year note. That house was the first thing I ever owned that nobody could take from me, or so I thought. Here's where Colleen comes back into the picture. Right around the time I closed on the house, she was going through her second divorce. She had 2 kids by then, my cousins Briar and Nola, who were 5 and 3. She called me crying, said her ex, Donnie, had cleaned out their joint account. She was getting evicted from her apartment and she had nowhere to go. She asked if she could stay with me for a few months, just until she got back on her feet. I want to be clear, I didn't hesitate. This was the woman who made me grilled cheese sandwiches when I was too sad to eat after my mom's funeral. Of course I said yes. I told her she could have the 2 spare bedrooms, one for her and one for the kids. I didn't charge her rent. I told her to just chip in on groceries and utilities when she could, and we'd figure the rest out as we went. That was 6 years ago. A few months turned into a year. A year turned into 2. Somewhere around year 3, I gently brought up the idea of her finding her own place. She hit me with the teary eyes and told me Briar was finally doing well in school. Nola had just started kindergarten and moving would destroy their stability. I felt like a jerk for even asking, so I dropped it. I'd moved into a new condo closer to my shop by then anyway, a place I was renting month to month, so it wasn't like I needed the house back immediately. I was doing well. My HVAC business had grown from just me and a van to a legitimate LLC. With 4 employees, 2 service trucks, and a steady roster of commercial contracts. The house was paid off by then too. I'd made double payments for years and burned that mortgage down early. That little ranch house was mine, free and clear. But here's what I didn't realize was happening while I was building my business. Colleen wasn't just living in my house. She was nesting. She repainted every room without asking. She tore out the old carpet in the living room and put down laminate flooring. She built a garden in the backyard. She enrolled the kids in the school district using my address. Obviously, she joined the local PTA. She had mail delivered there, used it as her legal address for everything. And little by little, she started referring to it as her home. Not Mason's house or the house I'm staying in, just my home. I noticed it, but I didn't say anything. I figured it was just how she talked. I told myself it didn't matter because I knew whose name was on the deed. That was my first mistake. Not the legal part, the emotional part. I let the lines blur because correcting them felt mean, and I was raised to believe that family helps family without keeping score. Then came last Sunday. I drove down to the house to drop off a birthday present for Nola, who just turned 9. Colleen had made brunch. The kids were running around the yard. It felt normal, nice even. After we ate, Colleen asked me to sit with her on the back porch. She had that tone, you know, the one, the overly calm voice people use when they've rehearsed what they're about to say 40 times in the mirror. She said, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly, Mason, I need to talk to you about something important. I've been raising my kids in this home for 6 years. This is where they learned to ride bikes. This is where Briar had his first sleepover. This is where Nola took her first steps into kindergarten. I've put money into this house. I've maintained it. I've made it a home, and I think it's only fair for the kids' sake that you sign the house over to me. I remember the exact sound the ice made in my glass of sweet tea when I set it down. It was one of those moments where your brain does a full system reboot, like when your computer freezes and you just see the little spinning wheel for 10 seconds before anything loads. I looked at her and said, "You want me to give you my house?" She didn't even flinch. She said, It's not really your house anymore, Mason. You haven't lived here in years. I've been the one paying to keep it up. The kids deserve stability. You can afford another place. I can't. And that's when I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, something cold and mechanical like a deadbolt sliding into place. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded slowly and said, "Let me think about it." She smiled. She actually smiled like she'd just closed a deal on a used car. She said, "Thank you, Mason. I knew you'd understand." I drove home that night in total silence. No radio, no podcast, just me and the road and the slow creeping realization that the woman I'd helped for 6 years had just looked me in the eye and told me I owed her my house. And the worst part, I could tell from the way she said it that she'd already told people. She'd already framed this narrative to the rest of the family. She wasn't asking, she was announcing. What Colleen didn't know was that while she was busy redecorating my living room and rehearsing her little porch speech, I'd quietly started pulling records on the property. Not because I suspected this exact conversation, but because my accountant, Wes, had flagged something during my annual tax review that didn't sit right. Something about the utility accounts, the property tax filings, and a homestead exemption that I had definitely never applied for. I didn't know what I was looking at yet, but I was about to find out. So after that Sunday brunch conversation where my aunt casually asked me to hand over my house like it was a leftover casserole dish, I went home and did what any reasonable person would do. I sat in my truck in my own driveway for about 20 minutes, staring at nothing, and then I called Wes. Wes Drummond has been my accountant since I incorporated my HVAC business 4 years ago. He's one of those guys who wears reading glasses on a chain around his neck and drinks black coffee like it personally offended him, and he's getting even. But the man is sharp, razor sharp. He's the kind of accountant who finds discrepancies in your taxes the way a bloodhound finds a pork chop in a snowstorm. I told him about Colleen's little request, and he went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mason, we need to talk about that homestead exemption flag I mentioned last month. I think it's more serious than I initially thought." Here's what Wes had found during my tax review. The property I own, my little 3-bedroom ranch, had a homestead exemption filed on it. For those who don't know, a homestead exemption is a tax break you get on your primary residence. It reduces your property tax bill. The catch is, you can only claim it on a home you actually live in. I hadn't lived in that house in over 4 years. I never filed for a homestead exemption, but someone had. Colleen had filed the homestead exemption in her name 2 years ago. Let me say that again so it sinks in. My aunt, who was living in my house for free, had gone to the county assessor's office and filed paperwork claiming she was the homeowner, reducing the property tax bill by about $1,400 a year, and pocketing the savings by paying the reduced amount directly. She'd set up auto pay on the property taxes from her own bank account, which sounds generous until you realize she was doing it specifically to build a paper trail showing she was maintaining the property. And here's the kicker. She'd been telling the county that she was the owner-occupant. Wes also found that Colleen had used the address and her fraudulent homestead status to bolster a personal credit application with a local credit union, claiming $187,000 in residential assets. She borrowed $23,000 against this fictional equity position, $23,000. I felt my pulse in my ears. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger, the slow, pressurized kind, the kind that doesn't make you flip a table. It makes you sit very still and start thinking 3 moves ahead. I asked Wes how long he'd known about the credit application. He said he'd only confirmed it that week. The homestead exemption had been the first thread, and when he pulled it, the whole sweater started unraveling. He told me I needed a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. I needed someone who handled property fraud and real estate disputes. I thanked him, hung up, and then I did something that I think surprised even me. I called Colleen. I called her, and I was pleasant, warm even. I told her I'd been thinking about what she said on the porch and that I understood where she was coming from. I told her I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet, but that I appreciated her being honest with me. She sounded relieved, almost giddy. She said, "I'm so glad you're being mature about this, Mason. I was worried you'd get all defensive. All defensive about someone asking me to give away my house that I owned free and clear. Defensive like I was the one being unreasonable. But I kept my voice level. I told her we'd talk more soon and to give Briar and Nola a hug for me. She said she would. She even said, 'Love you,' before she hung up. And I said it back because I needed her comfortable. I needed her calm. I needed her to believe with absolute certainty that she had won. That was Monday. By Wednesday, I'd gotten a referral from Wes to a real estate attorney named Sloan Kavanaugh. She operated out of a small firm in Knoxville that specialized in property disputes landlord-tenant law. and what she charmingly referred to as family real estate messes. Mid-40s handshake like a pipe wrench, and the kind of direct eye contact that made you feel like lying to her would be both pointless and dangerous. I sat in her office and laid the whole thing out. The 6 years of free housing, the homestead exemption fraud, the credit application, the Sunday porch conversation. Sloan listened without interrupting, which I appreciated, and then she leaned back in her chair and said, "Mason, your aunt hasn't just overstayed her welcome. She's been actively defrauding you and the county. The homestead exemption alone is a criminal misrepresentation. The credit application is potentially bank fraud, and the fact that she's now asking you to sign over the deed suggests she knows exactly what she's been doing and is trying to formalize it before you catch on." That hit me like a bag of gravel, because Sloan was right. Colleen's porch speech wasn't some emotional plea from a struggling single mom. It was the final move in a strategy. She'd spent years building a paper trail, and now she wanted the deed to lock it all in. If I had signed that house over, every fraudulent thing she'd done would have been retroactively legitimized. She wasn't asking for charity. She was trying to close an escape hatch. Sloan told me we had several options. But the first and most important step was documentation. She wanted copies of everything: the deed, the tax records, the homestead exemption, filing the credit union application, my mortgage payoff records, every utility bill, every piece of mail. She also wanted me to get a formal property appraisal, because the house I'd bought for $187,000 6 years ago was now worth somewhere north of $260,000, thanks to the market and, ironically, the improvements Colleen had made with my implied permission. I spent the rest of that week gathering documents. Wes helped me pull the tax records. I requested the homestead exemption filing from the county assessor's office. I got the credit union to confirm the outstanding balance on Colleen's line of credit, which had been drawn down to $18,400. She'd spent most of it on what I didn't know yet, but I had a sinking feeling it wasn't going toward the house. Through all of this, I kept up appearances. I texted Colleen normal things, asked how the kids were doing in school, sent her a funny video of a dog riding a skateboard. She texted back with laughing emojis and heart emojis, and at one point sent me a photo of Nola's art project from school, a painting of a house with the words, "My Home," written across the top in purple crayon. I stared at that photo for a long time. The next Sunday, I drove down to the house again. Colleen had invited me for dinner. I brought a pie from the bakery in town and played catch with Briar in the backyard. Nola showed me a loose tooth and demanded I be impressed, so I was. After dinner, Colleen brought it up again casually, like she was asking me to pass the salt. "Have you thought any more about what we talked about?" "I was thinking we could just do a quick claim deed. My friend Jolene's husband is a notary. He could do it this week, a quick claim deed." She'd already researched the mechanism. She had a notary lined up. This wasn't a conversation. This was a closing. I said, "I'm still thinking it over, Colleen. These things take time. I want to make sure we do it right." She pressed her lips together, and I saw irritation flash across her face, the kind you see on someone who's used to getting what they want. But she recovered fast. She patted my hand and said, "Of course. Take your time. I just want what's best for the kids." I drove home that night with a very clear picture for me. My aunt had been running a slow-motion con on me for 6 years. She'd moved into my house, established herself as the de facto owner, committed tax fraud and bank fraud, and was now trying to get me to legally hand over a $260,000 asset for free. And the worst part was that she'd done it all while smiling at me across the dinner table and telling me she loved me. When I got home, I had an email from Sloan. She pulled the credit union records. The $23,000 line of credit Colleen had taken out. She hadn't used it on the house. She'd used it on a down payment for a vacation condo in Pigeon Forge, a rental property. My auntie had leveraged my house fraudulently to buy herself an investment property. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a while. Then I texted Sloan 2 words, "green light." After I sent that green light text to Sloan, something settled in me. Not peace exactly, but clarity. The kind of clarity you get when you stop hoping someone will do the right thing and start planning for the fact that they won't. Sloan called me Monday morning at 8:15 sharp. She'd already drafted a preliminary strategy, and she walked me through it like a surgeon explaining an operation. Step 1, she said, was to establish an airtight record of ownership. That meant getting a certified copy of the deed from the county recorder's office, pulling the full chain of title, and getting a formal appraisal. Step 2 was documenting the fraud. Step 3 was the eviction. And Step 4, if necessary, was criminal referral. I told her I wanted to handle this clean. No drama, no screaming matches, no Jerry Springer moments. I wanted every single move to be legally bulletproof so that when the dust settled, there wasn't a judge in Tennessee who could look at the facts and side with Colleen. Sloan said, "That's exactly how I operate. We're going to be boring and boring and thorough wins. So that's what we did. The appraisal came back first. My house, the one I'd bought for $187,000, was now valued at $268,000. The appraiser noted the new flooring, the fresh paint, and the landscaping as contributing factors. But the primary driver was just the market. Property values in the Maryville area had climbed steadily over the past 5 years. That little ranch house I'd scraped together a down payment for at 27 was now worth more than $250,000, and my aunt wanted me to hand it to her with a quick claim deed and a notary named Jolene's husband. The chain of title was clean. My name, only my name from purchase to present. There was no ambiguity, no co-ownership claim, no tenancy agreement. Colleen was legally speaking a guest who had overstayed by approximately 5 years and 11 months. Next, Wes and I sat down and built a complete financial timeline. We documented every property tax payment, who made it, and from which account. We pulled the homestead exemption filing, which Colleen had signed herself, listing herself as the owner-occupant of the property. We obtained a copy of her credit union application, which listed $187,000 in residential property assets and described the home as owned free and clear. That application was signed under penalty of perjury. Wes looked at me over his reading glasses when he found that line and said, "Mason, your aunt didn't just fib on a form. She committed a federal offense." I want to pause here and explain something about how I was feeling during this period, because I think it matters. I wasn't enjoying this. I know the internet loves a good revenge story where the protagonist rubs their hands together like a cartoon villain, but that's not what this was. Every document I pulled, every fraudulent filing I uncovered, every lie I cataloged, it felt like peeling off a bandage that had been stuck to a wound I didn't know I had. This was the woman who made me grilled cheese when I was 11. This was the woman who drove me to baseball practice, and she had been methodically defrauding me for years. There was grief in this, real grief, not the dramatic cinematic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that sits in your chest at 200 in the morning when you're staring at a county assessor's document and realizing that someone you loved saw you as a resource to be extracted. But grief doesn't pay lawyers, and sentiment doesn't protect property. So I kept going. Sloan and I met twice that week. During our second meeting, she brought in a colleague named Garrett Hale, a litigator who specialized in fraud recovery. Garrett was younger than Sloan, maybe late 30s, with the energy of a guy who drank too much espresso and read case law for fun. He reviewed the credit union application and the homestead exemption filing and said something that stuck with me. He said, "The beautiful thing about fraud is that fraudsters always create their own paper trail. She didn't just steal from you, Mason. She documented it, signed it, and notarized it. She built our case for us." The plan Sloan and Garrett laid out was methodical. First, a formal 30-day notice to vacate served through a process server to ensure there was no dispute about delivery. Under Tennessee law, because Colleen had no lease and paid no rent, she was classified as a tenant at sufferance, and the notice period was 30 days. Second, simultaneously, they would file a complaint with the county assessor's office regarding the fraudulent homestead exemption. This would trigger an investigation and likely result in Colleen repaying the tax savings, roughly $2,800 over 2 years plus penalties. Third, they would refer the credit union application to the institution's fraud department, which would likely result in the immediate calling of her $18,400 outstanding balance. Fourth, they would prepare a civil complaint for fraud and unjust enrichment seeking recovery of the $23,000 she'd obtained through the fraudulent credit application plus damages. I asked Sloan if all of this was really necessary. Couldn't I just tell Colleen to leave and let the rest of it go? She looked at me with something that might have been sympathy and said, "You could, but if you don't address the fraud she could claim in court that you knew about and consented to her actions." The homestead exemption has been in place for 2 years. The credit application is 18 months old. Silence can be construed as acquiescence. If you want to protect yourself, you need to address everything formally on the record. So that's what we were doing, building a fortress of paperwork so tall and so tight that Colleen couldn't squeeze through a single crack. During this entire 3-week preparation period, I maintained complete operational silence with Colleen. I didn't change a single thing about our relationship. I texted her regularly. I sent the kids birthday cards with $20 bills inside. I even showed up to Briar's baseball game that Saturday, sat in the bleachers with Colleen, and cheered when Briar hit a double to left field. Colleen was relaxed, happy even. She mentioned the quick claim deed one more time casually while we were walking to the car after the game. She said Jolene's husband was available Thursday if I wanted to get it done. I told her I was still reviewing some things with my financial advisor and that I wanted to make sure the transfer was done properly for tax purposes. She seemed satisfied with that. She even said, "That's smart, Mason. You always were the responsible one." The responsible one. I almost laughed. Meanwhile, the family grapevine was already buzzing. I found out from my cousin Derek, Colleen's nephew on her ex-husband's side, that Colleen had been telling people the house was essentially hers. She told Derek's mom that I had verbally agreed to transfer the deed. She told my dad's cousin Ruth that I was finalizing the paperwork. She told her friend Jolene that the whole thing was basically a done deal and that she just needed to get Mason to sign. She was narrating a story in which she was the protagonist, the deserving single mother who had earned her home through sweat and sacrifice. And I was the supporting character, the grateful nephew who was finally doing the right thing. She'd built an entire alternate reality and invited the whole family to live in it. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't call Derek's mom or Ruth or Jolene to set the record straight. I let Colleen's version of events circulate without interference, because I knew that when the truth came out, the contrast between her story and reality would be more devastating than anything I could say. The Friday before the notice was set to be served, Colleen sent me a text that I still have saved on my phone. It said, "Hey sweetie, just wanted to let you know I'm getting the guest room repainted this weekend, going with a sage green. Also, Nola wants to know if you can come for dinner Sunday. She's making you a friendship bracelet. Love you. Sage green." She was repainting a room in my house, a room she was about to be formally asked to vacate in sage green, while her 9-year-old daughter made me a friendship bracelet. I texted back, "Sounds great. Tell Nola I'll be there. Love you too." Then I closed my phone, opened my laptop, and reviewed the final draft of the notice to vacate that Sloan had emailed me that afternoon. Everything was in order. The process server was scheduled for Monday morning. Colleen was planning a paint color. I was planning an eviction, and the whole family thought I was about to sign over my house. Monday was 3 days away. Sunday dinner at the house was surreal. I sat at my own kitchen table in my own house eating pot roast that my aunt had cooked in my oven while Nola handed me a friendship bracelet made of purple and yellow thread, and Briar told me about a science project on volcanoes. Colleen was in a great mood. She'd finished painting the guest room sage green, and she was already talking about her next project, replacing the kitchen backsplash with subway tile. She'd bookmarked 3 options on her phone and wanted my opinion. I picked the white one with the gray grout because it seemed like the kind of thing a person who was about to sign over his house would care about. After dinner, while the kids were watching a movie in the living room, Colleen pulled me aside in the hallway and lowered her voice. She said, "Mason Jolene's husband can do the notary thing any day this week. I know you said you wanted to do it properly, but honestly, a quick claim deed is pretty straightforward. We don't need to overcomplicate it." I looked at her and saw something I hadn't noticed before: urgency. Not the casual, confident urgency of someone who thinks they've already won. This was the nervous urgency of someone who senses the window is closing. Maybe she'd picked up on something in my tone. Maybe someone had mentioned seeing me at Sloan's office. Or maybe she just had that instinct that grifters develop, the internal alarm that goes off when a mark starts asking too many questions. I told her I'd have an answer by Wednesday. She squeezed my arm and said, "You're doing the right thing." I smiled and nodded and drove home feeling like I'd swallowed a rock. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a metronome. At 9:15, a process server named Dale, a heavy-set guy in a polo shirt who looked like he'd rather be fishing, knocked on the front door of my house. Colleen answered. Dale confirmed her identity, handed her a sealed envelope, and said, "You've been served." Then he left. Inside the envelope was a formal 30-day notice to vacate signed by Sloan Kavanaugh on my behalf, referencing the property address, the deed number, and my sole ownership. It stated that Colleen was a tenant at sufferance with no lease agreement and that she was being given 30 calendar days to vacate the premises. It included a paragraph noting that any personal property left on the premises after the 30-day period would be handled in accordance with Tennessee Code Annotated Section 6628 to 405. At 9:45, Sloan's office sent a formal letter to the Blount County Assessor's Office reporting the fraudulent homestead exemption filing and requesting an investigation. The letter included copies of my deed, the homestead exemption application signed by Colleen, and an affidavit from me confirming that I had never authorized anyone to file for a homestead exemption on my behalf. At 10:30, Garrett Hale sent a certified letter to the credit union's fraud department detailing the false information on Colleen's credit application and requesting a full review of the account. The letter included a copy of my deed, the credit application listing $187,000 in owned residential property, and a statement from West documenting that Colleen had no ownership interest in the property whatsoever. By noon, every legal domino was in position. All I had to do was wait. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang at 2:17 that afternoon. It was Colleen. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 2:19 and 2:21 and 2:23. 4 calls in 6 minutes. I let them all ring through. The voicemail she left was something else. Her voice started shaking within the first 5 seconds. "Mason, what the heck is this? I just got served papers saying I have 30 days to leave. This is my home. You know this is my home. The kids are here. Briar has school. What are you doing? Call me back now." I didn't call back, not because I was being cruel, because Sloan had explicitly instructed me that from this point forward, all communication with Colleen regarding the property should go through her office. Anything I said could be used against me if Colleen decided to fight the eviction, and Sloan wanted everything on the record in writing through counsel. Over the next 4 hours, my phone became a war zone. I got 11 texts from Colleen ranging from confused to furious to pleading. I got a call from my dad who sounded bewildered and said Colleen had called him hysterical. I got a text from Derek's mom asking if I'd lost my mind. I got a call from my uncle Vernon, Colleen's older brother, who left a voicemail saying I was tearing this family apart over a house, my house, the house I bought, paid for, and owned. But sure, Vernon, I'm the one tearing things apart. I responded to no one except my dad. I called him back, calmly explained the situation in broad terms. Told him I couldn't go into details because it was now a legal matter, and asked him to trust me. He was quiet for a long time and then said, I hope you know what you're doing, son. I told him I did. Tuesday was worse. Colleen showed up at my condo at 7:30 in the morning while I was making coffee. I opened the door and she was standing there with mascara running down her face, holding the notice to vacate like it was a burning document. She said, you need to explain this to me right now. I said, Colleen, my attorney, has asked that all communication about the property go through her office. I can give you her number. She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Your attorney, Mason, I'm your family. You don't get lawyers involved with family. I gave her Sloan's business card, which I had ready in my pocket, and said, please call her if you have questions. I'm not able to discuss this directly anymore. She snatched the card, looked at it like it had insulted her, and said, this is because I asked about the house, isn't it? I thought we could talk about it like adults. I said, we can, through attorneys. She left. She didn't slam the door, which somehow made it worse. She just pulled it shut quietly like she was closing a chapter. Wednesday through Friday were a blur of phone calls, texts, and family drama. Colleen had launched a full-scale public relations campaign. She called every relative we had in common and told them her version of events. In her version, she was a devoted mother who had lovingly maintained a property for 6 years, and I was a heartless landlord who was throwing her and her children onto the street over a misunderstanding. She cried to anyone who would listen. She posted vague, emotional things on social media about family betrayal, and when the people you trust the most turn their backs on you. My cousin Tully, one of the few people in the family who actually knew me well, called me Thursday night. He said, Maze, what's the real story here? Because Colleen's version has more holes than Swiss cheese. I told Tully the basics: the homestead exemption fraud, the credit application, the Pigeon Forge condo. He went silent for about 15 seconds and then said a word that I won't repeat, but that rhymed with holy spit. I asked Tully to keep it to himself for now. He said he would. Then he said, Mason, for what it's worth, you're handling this exactly right. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting what's yours. That meant more than he probably knew. Friday evening, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was from Jolene's husband, the notary. He said, Hey Mason, Colleen asked me to reach out. She says there's been a misunderstanding and she'd like to sit down and talk about the deed transfer before things go too far. I'm happy to facilitate. I forwarded the text to Sloan without responding. Saturday morning, Sloan called me with an update. The credit union had received Garrett's letter and had opened an internal investigation. They'd frozen Colleen's line of credit pending review. The county assessor's office had acknowledged receipt of our homestead exemption complaint and assigned an investigator. The walls were closing in. Colleen just didn't know how tight they were getting. Then, Saturday night at 11:47, my phone lit up with a text from Colleen. 3 words, Mason, please call. 30 seconds later, another text. The credit union just froze my account. What did you do? Then a third. What did you do? I set my phone face down on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and went to sleep. Tomorrow was day 7 of 23 to go. The next 3 weeks played out like a slow-motion avalanche, and I watched every rock fall from a safe distance. Colleen hired an attorney. Or rather, she hired a guy named Bryce who worked out of a strip mall office next to a vape shop. Bryce sent Sloan a letter arguing that my aunt had established an equitable interest in the property through continuous occupation, financial contribution, and substantial improvements. Sloan later told me his cited case law was both misapplied and from a different state. Sloan responded with a 12-page letter that could have been used as a legal textbook chapter. She attached the deed, the chain of title, the mortgage payoff documentation, and my bank statements showing every payment I'd made. She also attached Colleen's fraudulent homestead exemption, filing her fraudulent credit union application, and a forensic accounting summary from West showing that Colleen's total financial contribution over 6 years amounted to roughly $13,800 in utilities and property taxes. Against this, she'd received approximately $93,600 in rent-free housing at fair market value of $1,300 per month. Sloane's letter concluded with a line that I've memorized. It said, Ms. Kavanaugh's client has been more than generous. Rather than pursuing criminal charges for fraud, forgery of public records, and material misrepresentation to a financial institution, Mr. Hargrove is offering your client a clean exit within the 30-day notice period. We suggest she take it. Bryce went quiet after that. I don't know exactly what conversation happened between him and Colleen behind closed doors, but I imagine it involved Bryce reading Sloane's letter, looking up the potential penalties for homestead exemption fraud in Tennessee, and then gently explaining to Colleen that she was not in fact in any position to negotiate. During this period, the credit union completed its investigation and formally called Colleen's outstanding balance of $18,400, giving her 60 days to repay in full or face collections, and a fraud referral to the district attorney. The Pigeon Forge condo was already underwater on its own mortgage, and she didn't have the liquid assets to cover the debt. The county assessor also revoked the homestead exemption, assessing Colleen a penalty of $4,200 covering the 2 years of tax savings, plus a 50% surcharge. Colleen's public relations campaign intensified as her legal position deteriorated. She called my dad 3 more times. She called Uncle Vernon. She called Ruth Derrick's mom, Jolene, and at least 4 other people I hadn't spoken to in years. Her narrative evolved as the facts became harder to hide. First, it was Mason is throwing us out for no reason. Then it became, Mason is retaliating because I asked for something reasonable. By week 3, it had shifted to Mason is being manipulated by his lawyers and doesn't understand what he's doing. The family fallout was predictable. About 60% of the relatives sided with Colleen initially because she was a single mom with 2 kids, and I was a single guy with a business and a condo. Uncle Vernon called me cold and selfish. He said, "That house is just a building, Mason. Those are children." I told Vernon calmly that I wasn't putting property over children. I was putting the law over fraud. He didn't have a response to that. Tully, true to his word, started quietly asking family members pointed questions. Did you know Colleen filed a homestead exemption in her own name? Did you know she took out a line of credit claiming to own Mason's house? One by one. The family members who had been calling me a monster started going quiet. The 30-day notice expired on a Wednesday. Colleen hadn't moved out. Sloane filed for an unlawful detainer the following morning. Under Tennessee law, once the notice period expires and the occupant hasn't vacated the property, owner can file in General Sessions Court for a court order of possession. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Colleen showed up to the hearing with Bryce. I showed up with Sloane and Garrett. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Whitfield, reviewed the notice, the deed, the timeline, and the lack of any lease agreement. She asked Bryce if his client had any legal basis to remain on the property. Bryce made a brief argument about implied tenancy and equitable estoppel. Judge Whitfield listened, politely reviewed Sloane's documentation, and ruled in my favor in under 15 minutes. She granted an order of possession effective immediately with a 7-day grace period for Colleen to remove her personal belongings. After the hearing, Colleen caught me in the hallway outside the courtroom. She was crying, but it wasn't the performative crying she'd been doing for the family. This was real messy broken. She said, "Mason, you can't do this. Where am I supposed to go? The kids start school in 6 weeks. I don't have first and last month's rent. I don't have anywhere. You're ruining our lives." I stood there and I let her finish. I owed her that much. And when she was done, I said, "Colleen, I gave you 6 years of free housing. I never asked for a penny, and you repaid me by filing fake documents with the county, lying to a bank, using my house to buy yourself a vacation property, and then trying to get me to sign away my home. I didn't ruin your life. You made choices. These are the consequences." She said, "I did those things for my kids." I said, "No, you didn't. The Pigeon Forge condo wasn't for your kids. The credit application wasn't for your kids. The homestead exemption wasn't for your kids. Those were for you." She didn't have an answer for that. She just stood there holding her purse strap with both hands. And for a second, she looked exactly like woman who used to make me grilled cheese after my mom died. And it hurt. It hurt more than I expected, but I didn't flinch. I said, "I hope you land on your feet, Colleen. I really do. But you need to be out by next Wednesday." She moved out the following Tuesday. Her brother Vernon came with a pickup truck and a trailer. They loaded up her furniture, the kids' things, the sage green paint cans that were still in the garage. Briar wouldn't look at me. Nola waved from the truck window. That one got me. I won't pretend it didn't. In the months that followed, the rest of the legal pieces fell into place. The credit union determined that Colleen's application constituted material misrepresentation and referred the case to the Blount County District Attorney's Office. She was charged with 1 count of fraud by misrepresentation, a Class D felony in Tennessee. She took a plea deal that included restitution, probation, and 200 hours of community service. The Pigeon Forge condo was sold at a loss to cover part of the credit union debt. She still owes about $6,000. The county assessor's penalty stood. She paid it in installments. As for the family, it took about 4 months for the full story to circulate. Once people learned about the homestead fraud, The credit application and the Pigeon Forge condo, the tide shifted hard. Uncle Vernon never apologized, but he stopped calling me selfish. Ruth called and said she was sorry for jumping to conclusions. Tully bought me a steak dinner and said, "You handled that better than I would have." My dad and I are fine. He told me he was proud of me for handling it the way I did. He said, "Your mom would have been proud too." That was the first time I cried through the whole thing. Colleen and I don't speak. I don't hate her. I'm not carrying bitterness around like a suitcase I can't put down. I just don't have anything left to say to someone who looked at my kindness and saw an opportunity. She's living in an apartment in Sevierville now. The kids are in a new school. I hope they're doing okay. I genuinely do. The house is mine again. I had the locks changed, hired a cleaning crew, and spent a weekend just walking through the rooms. I'm renting it out now to a young couple properly with a lease, a security deposit, and a property management company handling everything by the book. My HVAC business is growing. I added a 5th truck last month. Wes still finds things to worry about in my tax returns. Sloan sent me a Christmas card. Garrett sent me a bill, but it was worth every penny. If you're reading this and you're in a similar situation, if someone you love is living in your property and the lines have gotten blurry, I want to tell you something that I wish someone had told me 6 years ago. Kindness without boundaries is just a blank check with your name on it. And some people, even people you love, will cash it until the account is empty. Protect your assets. Document everything, and never ever assume that family won't take advantage of you just because they're family.